You're a player coach. You're sort of forced to say this one time, this one customer, or customers are saying this, or customers are saying that. And it sounds like arguing from authority. Well, it actually is arguing from authority without data. That's how I think of that. Is your CEOs, when you get up and running, if you're clipping along and moving very quickly, see sales and marketing, and they're going to meet with them every week, and they're going to see dynamic changing this. They're always doing that. They're always mixing this, changing the strategy, how we're going to approach this. And sales and marketing really influences the company and the product even. Pre-sales, I want to think about from a customer success perspective is we want to influence the product and the marketing post-sales just as much as sales and marketing does pre-sales. They are much more transactional here, and you're going to have a smaller bite of the pie here. So it's not going to change every week, but you got to be able to show what you're doing and how you classify customers and demonstrate the problems that your customers are having. Because without data, it just appears very tactical. The real problem with arguing from authority is it actually works early on. People are like, oh, okay, start. And then if you start expecting your product team to invest in the things you're saying, you're getting more and more confident. They're getting less and less confident every time they hear it. And so it's a challenge. Where those things cross, I say, is that's where people start to feel like you're just making shit up. Right. And so the challenge with all of that is, like, it feels better for you, but it's less effective there, and nobody has any data to go on. So I'm going to show you some examples of that here in a minute. So you might think, well, where do we start? So I'm going to talk about lifecycle reporting. And Robert, I shared a little bit of this when we talked, but I'll go into a little bit more detail here. These are the life cycle stages, and this is not the customer journey. We can all do the customer journey, and I really dislike, I'm anti-buzzword, the product market fit, all that stuff that people throw out there. It's like, I know what it is, but we don't need to belabor that. We got to get into the tactics and making things work. So the customer journey is important, and you want to get them all. It ends up here with the expansion when the customer's perfect. But in the real world, customers die. So we do want to talk about the full life cycle and what do we do when this customer, gives us notice or does not renew, and how do we report on that? Customers are going to tell you anything during the onboarding process that they'd never tell you during the sales process, even if it was a week ago. So you have to recognize you can't rely on sales to pass all the data. A lot of times people say, oh yeah, sales hands off this or hands off that. It's good to have because you want sales to be thinking about that, but you can't outsource your whole future on that. But I'm going to talk about the things that nobody in customer success does at these points. And so these are kind of the rare pieces that should be included that aren't. And when I say nobody, I really mean that. When I go into companies, none of this stuff is here, but everyone says it is. So I do an interview process, and then I look at the data. And when I interview people, they're all like, oh yeah, we do that, we do. And I don't think people are lying to me. I think they're just saying what they want it to be, or what they've talked about or what they think it is. And you go look at the data and it's just not there. And so that's one of the things where, I've recognized you can't just ask, you have to actually validate, with data. So setting goals are really critical. Everyone says they do this, but they don't. But there are 13 questions around goals to ask. And I'm not going to go through all 13, and you don't need 13, but it just depends on your business and how you would approach that. You probably only need a couple to start with, but then you get them in a structured way, so there's only 3 or 4 answers to them. My favorite is, why did you leave your current provider? In some cases, you're new tech, and so you don't have a current provider, so then you wouldn't ask that question. Or how are you doing this function before? You definitely want to know how they were doing the function before, so you can compare it to that and show the different value there. Retention questions are similar, and why would we ask retention questions during onboarding? We're so busy doing training, doing all of those things, that we don't think about, this 12 months is going to come in, 12 months, right? And if it's an annual renewal, we want to be asking these questions now. That's how you really become proactive. I think we say proactive all the time, but we don't really do anything for it. What needs to happen in the next 12 months for you to renew? It's a hard question to get CSMs to ask, because they're like, oh, it's a little forward. I don't want to confront. You talked about your 22-year-old head of service, the very uncomfortable question to ask, but it's a completely rational business question to ask. And 100% of the time, your customer will not know. You want to understand their expectations so that you can try to tailor that. If they want $1 billion out of your product, probably not going to happen in the first year. So let's set that expectation, or we can help them build goals. The best way to do that is to pick a customer like them. So if you have 3 types of customers to start out with, maybe it's very, very generic, large, in your case, Robert, it might be large schools, middle schools, whatever the case is. And then you can compare them to like a best practice type organization. Like, here's what schools that want to achieve what you do, here's what customers that want to do this, here's their best practices. And then you have something to hold them accountable for. You see how this is different than traditional onboarding. Traditional onboarding is, doing the training, and your goal in onboarding is not to do the training. Your goal in onboarding is to get the customer to do the things you train them to do. Now that sounds like, well, no kidding, but most people measure whether they did the training or not whether the customer is doing the thing you trained them to do. And that's the important part. That gets to first value. So you definitely want to measure, does the water flow through the pipe you just welded on, or is it leaking everywhere? And that's just a very minimum thing. Maybe it's a login. Maybe it's the first time they pulled the trigger that was not in a testing environment. First value is what gets you to active phase. You don't want to set that too high. You don't want them to be super high performing before they leave onboarding. Otherwise, they'll back up in onboarding. So in the active phase, that's a little bit different. That's where you just make sure that they are achieving that first value. Something like 10% of customers never use the product. B2B SaaS customers never use the product. And so you want to prevent that by this first value thing, making sure that you understand that they've achieved first value. So at least they know how it works. And then you can start working on them to make them a better customer and get them on the customer journey that we talked a little bit about. This is where we measure the goals and we compare the goals to how the product is performing. Most of the time, you can't get this perfect value formula. Like, you do 10 transactions, you save $1 a transaction, it's $10. Usually you have to get, it's a softer goal. You have to look at customer engagement, whatever the purpose is, but there's a lot of different ways you can do that. But this is where we make sure that we achieve to goals, and it has to be a hard number. The qualitative risks, I'm going to go through this in a lot more detail, but there's 7 common risks. Underneath them are details that are relevant specifically to your business, but everybody has product gaps. Robert, your product gaps are very different than Jennifer's, I'm sure. But there are gaps, whatever they are. And some of them are integration. Well, that's fairly standard, but who the partners you integrate with are completely different. So we want to measure those things, not in the heart rate monitor kind of statistical way. That's quantitative, and that's really hard to get to, especially early on. We all want to jump to that, but you can't get there. And then finally, in churn, the very least you can get out of a customer. The way I say it is a little morbid, but the only thing you can get out of a dead customer is why they died. And so you have to have systems set up to explain that. You have to have the ability to reach out to them, or the ability, some sort of closed loop way, especially if there's notice. If you have a notice where a customer has to give you notice, where it's auto renewal if they don't, that's the best way to design this. Not because you want to trick a customer into auto renewing, you still remind them, you still do all those things, but it's because you can make that as part of your cancellation process. And then finally, how you measure all of this is surprise churn. This is the most often missed thing. You have this great health score and all these things and this whole journey, and this is how we're measuring customers. And then when one dies out of the blue, it's like the 40-year-old that runs marathons, it just falls over dead. That doesn't happen anymore because we have really good diagnostic healthcare, at least in this country. And so when it does, it's a big deal. Well, that's surprise churn here. And oftentimes people have this whole infrastructure built up, but they don't measure who slipped through. Like, who got through the cracks. That's a problem with the diagnostic somewhere. Does it mean it's your fault or this person's? No, it's not about placing blame. It's about figuring out, how did they sneak through. If you're not at this point yet, you maybe can't design this to the nth degree, but you want to get it generally set up into something like this. You're going to have more than 50 customers. You can't keep them straight in your head. If they're big enterprise customers, then it's even less than that. This is the kind of thing I would plan for, and it's sort of the base level of what stage they're in. It's totally version 1, but something this simple starts to show you like the hurdles and the different problems that you have with customers, and it starts to give you like an insight into customer behavior. For example, larger customers are at risk. How do I know that? It's because 12% of our customers, our labels, are at risk, and 19% of the revenue is at risk. That's a big number. And then expected churn, look at the percentage, that's about normal. But if this was much higher here, you'd recognize, oh, we're losing our big customers. Oftentimes this is smaller. We're losing much smaller customers, And that might be okay. You're probably not giving them the focus, not spending the money to give them the focus. Now, for both of you, that's not okay because you're both small companies. Any customer's loss is a big thing. But like over time, it's going to be different. Right? So this is like a version 5 of this report. And I'm going to jump into it a little faster here to catch up. Somehow I got behind. But so like, let's say this is all custom to your business. You got a kickoff call, you got training, you got first value. And what I would say is just put waiting to in front of those. We're waiting to do a kickoff call. We're waiting to do a training. And we're waiting to finish or to get our first value, which means I'm finished with the previous stage. So in this case, you look at it and you got, okay, there's 20 customers waiting in the kickoff stage, waiting to have a kickoff call. And they've been there for 15 days on average. So that's getting a little long for most people, certainly for you guys, because these are a lot of customers. But when you get larger, you want to be able to track this. And first value is pretty quick though. It's 3 days and there's only 5 of them in there. They're moving right through. So I don't have a problem here. I have a problem here. Do I need to just throw more people at it? No, not necessarily. It's just a question of what's holding this back, but it gives you a place to go look. Like this is now a problem that I want to go try to fix.